Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Erling Kagge. Erling is a Norwegian explorer, publisher, author, entrepreneur, and art collector. He was the first person to complete the Three Poles Challenge on foot, reaching the North Pole, the South Pole, and the summit of Mount Everest. In 1990, along with Børge Ausland, Erling became the first to reach the North Pole unsupported, traveling 800 kilometers in 58 days without external assistance. In 1993, he became the first person to walk solo and unsupported to the South Pole, covering 1,310 kilometers in 50 days. He completed the journey without radio contact. After his expeditions, he became a best-selling author, writing 8 books on exploration, philosophy, and art collecting, which has been translated into 42 languages, and has a new book out. Erling, welcome to the Future Space.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for inviting.
Quite a career. Wow.
Yeah, you need to take one step at a time. And I believe we're all born explorers. So, when I looked at my own kids when they were born, they were stretching their arms, their legs out in 4 different directions and screaming for more space. And after a year, they start to wonder what's between themselves and the horizon, and they start to walk towards the horizon. So that's how we are. And of course, that spirit never disappears. It's somewhere in between zero point 0.1 and 99.9, the strength.
I do want to come back to that definition of exploration, but before we get there, Erling, could you share with us 3 words that for you captures the essence of space?
If I had more words, I would quote Emily Dickinson's beautiful poem, "The brain is wider than the sky," which I think is true. But to me, it's curiosity, which I think is fantastic, wonder, which I think it's even greater, is the German word Wunder, which is kind of, even greater and deeper meaning than wonder. And unlimited, which I very much like, that there's no end to this story.
And if I ask you, what is the human story of space? What would that bring to you?
To me, the idea I'm quite often asked, like, what's remained to be explored? And to me, everything remains to be explored in the sense that we are changing, the world is changing, so somehow everything is new under the sun. And the history of expeditions or discoveries have almost always been about rediscoveries. It was always someone standing on the beach waving when people from Europe sailed across the oceans in the 15th century and later, and also with the Vikings, of course. But there's few exceptions, and the South Pole, no people, North Pole, north of where Inuits are living, as I'm writing about in my latest book, After the North Pole. It's also a place where explorers came to cross an ocean covered by ice with no people. And it's great similarities, I think, with space travel today, that they're really flying into a part of the or parts of the universe which is untouched by man.
I want to ask you a question. You mentioned we're born explorers. So, what is the definition of exploration or of an explorer for you?
I am aware that people are discussing if someone is an explorer or is someone is an adventurer or whatever people do, depending on what people do. To me, the definition is not so important. I think it's this old-fashioned idea that an explorer, will move into territory which is unknown. Is a bit naive because very little territory throughout the ages have been unknown by man. So I think it's somehow you need to define it for yourself. I think whether you're an explorer or if you're not an explorer. And today, it seems like many people define themselves as explorers. And you're a dentist and auditor, and you fly around the world, and you think about yourself as an explorer. And I think that's okay.
If space was available to explore, and you were in your younger age, would you go out and venture and explore in the same way that you've explored on Earth?
Yes, most likely. I've been working with European Space Agency here in Europe to give them advice on how we can have the first European to the moon and also the first European to Mars. It's only one disadvantage, one huge difference from what I have been doing with what astronauts will be doing in the future, and that's so much comes down to logistics, so much come down to engineers, so much come down to money, and to me, I'm not saying it's better or worse than anything else, but to me, exploration is also about simplicity, not having too much technical help, to be by yourself, to not, to be in nature and not to conquer nature, but kind of play along with nature. That has been exploration for me. And of course, being an astronaut, it is different.
It is indeed quite different. And you mentioned that's what's exploration to you. You also, I watched yesterday one of your interviews, and you mentioned that when you were collecting art, you need to be ahead of your taste. Is it also being ahead, being in the unknown, also being an explorer, the attitude of exploration, but in art collecting?
Yeah, I think there are many similarities. The most obvious ones are like you have to be prepared. You have to be really well prepared. As Roald Amundsen wrote after he reached the South Pole as the first in history, victory awaits the one who has everything in order. People calls it good luck, while defeat always follows bad preparations, and people call it bad luck. And that's like in exploration and in art. And art collecting is also very much about curiosity. It's about making life more difficult than it has to be, especially contemporary art. And somehow you need to be ahead of your own taste if you're going to be able to find interesting pieces. But also in exploration, I think you need to be somehow ahead of what's going on in the world if you're going to have any firsts. That's for sure.
In that same video, she said you love nature, you love art, but nature is not art. So what is the difference between the two? Some people actually will look at nature and it says it's the most beautiful art, in the world. But you make quite a difference between the two.
Nature can be more beautiful than anything. I actually believe nature is more beautiful and more interesting and more challenging and more important in our lives than anything else. But then again, art is being made by an artist. And it's an idea, fixed idea with the artist. And it's, to me, an art piece, interesting art piece, not lousy art, but interesting art piece, somehow contains the artist's sorrows, broken hearts, humor, the books the artist has read, the movies they have seen, the era they grew up. All this is somehow, in varying degrees, contained in the artwork. So in that sense, it's different from nature. So it's not a competition about being most beautiful, it's just two different fields.
So you don't agree if machines or if AI will be able to create art, what it will create is not art, it will be content creation, but not art.
Yeah, it will certainly look like art. Maybe it even look like great art. It will be, it already is difficult to see the difference. And it's not only with AI, it's just like, people taking photos. And one of the most common subjects you can take a photo of is to look out of the window of an airplane and take a photo of the engine. And but somehow when an artist like Wolfgang Tillmans is doing the same and working on the photo at his lab later, it's just a little bit tiny thing different from the photo you and I will take. And his photo is art, and our photo is kind of reportage or something else. But again, in life, you need to believe. You need to believe this is art, and you need to believe this is great art. Because if you don't believe it, it's not great art to you. But just like just like with the girlfriends or wives, you need to believe in love. And if you don't believe in love, it's a major part of life is meaningless. And you need to believe in exploration. You need to believe in the importance of traveling to the moon. You need to importance of traveling to Mars. And if you don't, it appears like a waste of time.
It's a pretty sad existence if you don't believe in anything, or if you don't believe that what's ahead of us has more value than what's behind.
Yeah, I agree. I believe the best is yet to come. I think it's very important today to be optimistic because people tend to be very pessimistic. They believe tomorrow will be much worse than yesterday. It's kind of common to believe we live in a time where the world is doomed. Of course, to be pessimistic is the easiest thing in life, doesn't demand anything. You're also taken more seriously by other people if you're pessimistic. You also have, one thing in common with every generation. Let's say there has been 10,000 generations on Earth so far, and every generation has somehow believed the world will go under in over time, and they've always been wrong. So that's also what I like with this just idea with space exploration. That it goes on. It's always some possibilities. It's you can always fail, you can always succeed. No one knows really what's going to happen tomorrow. And although it says in the Bible that there's nothing new under the sun, but my experience, it's something new under the sun. Everything is new under the sun every day.
Well, we do share the same perspective about tomorrow. The best is always yet to come because we do have the agency to change it. The past is the past, it's been done. The only thing that you can do is learn from it, but the future is yet to be written. We tend to romanticize the past, taking for granted all the things that we have today and not really understanding these realities. Erling, I find that one of the reasons why I believe like that is because in my expeditions, when you're in nature, right, in nature, there's no wrong or right. There are winners and losers. It depends where you sit in that equation as a species. And that scale is so much bigger. Has nature, these moments of solitude in nature where it was just you and the elements, how much has it shaped your understanding or your approach of life and your understanding of the world?
As it says in a poem, we are all a part of that we have met. For me, nature has always been important. I had parents who I wouldn't say they forced me to be in nature, but there kind of was no alternative in our lives. So we had to spend time there. And I think, after having sailed the oceans and skied to the poles and climbed mountains and many, many other adventures, I believe the biggest mistake we are doing today is to separate ourselves from nature, to believe that we are above nature, to believe that we don't need nature, and this kind of old idea, as I write about in After the North Pole, this idea that came up in the 16th century in Europe, in England, that we're going to conquer nature. The huge goal was to conquer nature. And of course, humans have been fighting nature and trying to exploit nature to all ages. But this idea that you should conquer nature, you should conquer the ice, you should conquer the Nile to find the source to the Nile, you should conquer the North Pole. You see a red line through the history of exploration to where we are today, that people kind of believe we have conquered nature. And of course, as everyone who spent time in nature knows, no one will conquer nature. Nature is always stronger, and we have to adapt. And I think that's one of the reasons for all the unrest you see in the society today. People claim to be lonely, depressed, and of course, there are broader problems like climate change. It kind of, one of the sources to all this is our lack of respect for nature.
Do you think it's a product of, if you look at the human species, we're one of the youngest species on Earth, and at the beginning we were afraid of nature. like a baby is, dependent of its parent. But when you become a teenager, you become rebellious and you push away your parents. You need to create that sense of identity, only to come back later more humbled and understanding that life is a little bit more complicated and black and white. Do you think that the humans have been going through that transition of being afraid, having to separate itself so that it can kind of find itself, and then we will be coming back with an understanding that it's not one or the other, but it's the two together?
Yeah, I think the two together is, I think it's a good way to put it. It's like, it's not a dualistic view of the world. It's kind of, we're all together, we're all part of nature, and we came from nature, we're ending up in nature. So, yeah, I'm optimistic again. I think, it's moving the wrong direction today, and, maybe it will, keep on moving wrong direction for a while. And then it will turn, because it's kind of, I think it will be obvious for more and more people that you need to respect. You need to respect the environment, and not only respect it, but also take pleasures from it. Like, to spend time in nature. It's like, it's whenever I start, like just here in Oslo, start to let's do a little hike in 1 or 2 hours, get into the forest. People who just started, on the same trek as I am, they look a little bit exhausted, maybe a little bit frustrated, maybe a little bit tired. And then when you see people returning from the walk, they always look happy. They always look relaxed. They always look, re-engineered. So it's kind of the oldest advice in the world that, if you don't feel well, go for a walk. Miracles happening every day. We just need to be aware of them.
It's all a question of perspective. And one of the sayings that I share is, our relationship with the environment has to change, not because we need to save it, but because we understand that we're a product of our environment. And so if we sterilize it, then we sterilize ourselves. If we destroy it, then we destroy ourselves ultimately.
Absolutely.
Erling, you wrote a lot about the solitude and silence. What is the value of solitude, or what is the value of silence? These places of what appears to be empty can bring to the development of our character.
I wrote a full book about it, but I will try to make it short. Silence, especially the silence within, the silence which is inside you, waiting for you to discover it and explore it, which is there all the time. That silence is about yourself. That silence is about who you are. And one of the greatest goals in life should always be to get to know yourself. That's one of the oldest advices in the world. And I think every advice that lasted a couple of thousand years or more, we should take really seriously. While noise is the opposite, of course, that's about everyone else. I'm not only thinking about sounds, but I'm also thinking about, everything that disturbs you through the day and the night. Everything from man-made lights can do it. Sounds, of course, telephone buzzing, just waiting for a reply on something. All this is about running away from the one you are. A major problem is that we tend to choose the easiest options in life. And the easiest option is almost always noise. That's why we, spend 4 hours, 3, 4, 5 hours every day looking into a screen and being bored, because the kind of definition of boredom is lack of meaning. I remember when I was a little kid, my mother said to me, and I was bored because nothing was happening. And my mother said to me, it's healthy to be bored sometimes. And I thought she was bullshitting me, but she was she was right. And today people are bored for the opposite reason. It's just too many alternatives, too many things are happening. But the feeling of boredom, the feeling of lack of meaning is the same. Then for me, a way to find silence is to be in nature and spend time in nature. But you can also find silence when you're standing in the shower in the morning. You walk the stairs instead of taking the lift. You can maybe walk 2 or 3 stations instead of taking the metro. I love to cook. When I'm cooking, I find silence because I need to focus on the silence. The best form of silence, which is a little bit more difficult to achieve, is like also when you stop thinking, because also thinking sometimes is kind of noise because you think about the future or the past. It's difficult to think about the present, and the present you need to experience, and that kind of silence, and also eventually then solitude, because my silence is different from your silence, of course, because it's about who we are. I think it's a huge mistake to not try to kind of, get to know yourself.
I think silence is one of the purposes, creating a space for the unscripted or for the magic to happen. Right? If it's constantly filled with everything, then there's no room for these random thoughts that can come in or for the unexpected. Right? If you create that space for the silence and you're comfortable with it, you don't try to control it too much, then you have surprises. One of the questions I want to ask you, in your long periods of silence on these expeditions, did you ever find a place where there was absolutely no noise, or you just developed the capacity to filter the noise to a place where you just kind of, you were not bothered by it?
No, I never found a place with no noise in nature. I went to this room in Paris with no noise, very, very strange place to be. But in nature, almost all the time, there's some sound somehow. And of course, on the ice is moving, making noises. On the oceans, it's always some noise, always some sounds. But it's kind of calm. It's like when I walked to the South Pole, as I said, I didn't have any possibility to have a communication with the outside world. To begin with, it's uncomfortable, of course. Just like if you leave your phone for a few hours at home, it could be also be uncomfortable for the first minutes. But then you kind of calm down. Again, this inner silence, and quite often also it's quite silent around you, and all the sounds are kind of natural sounds. It's not a car passing or something you have to be afraid of. It feels much more comfortable and safe.
You were saying that you've never found a place of silence, in nature or
Not 100% silence. Very
100%,
quiet.
very
Very,
quiet, 100% silent. But did you ever found the inner, like an inner place where you had an absolute silence, or it was not 100%, but you were able to filter that, the inner one?
yes, absolutely. Often I'd find myself in a situation when I feel it's absolutely quiet. I find it in nature, especially when I'm walking, skiing, you move, you're being moved, motion, emotion. It is in our language. It's in any language. It's in Norwegian, it's in English, it's even in Sanskrit. You see the similarity between walking and moving and being moved. So then I get it. And also, I have to add that 20 years ago, I studied philosophy, and a friend of mine at college, he said to me, you should learn hypnosis because you have most likely hypnotized yourself on all these expeditions, not being able to look at left or the right or back, just totally focused on getting to these different places. So I learned hypnosis. It's self-hypnosis, also hypnotize other people. So today I try to hypnotize myself almost every day in the afternoons. Then I also find this kind of really quiet place. So again, the silence is there waiting for you at all times.
Hypnotizing yourself, is it kind of a tool to get into a trance? I mean, these two are related in their definition, or?
In nature, when I'm having a particular goal, it's kind of light hypnosis that kind of everything else kind of disappears from your mind, that you just have this one only focus. When I do self-hypnosis, I kind of disappear from the world, kind of sink into your subconsciousness, and it's like you're just floating a little bit above your bed, for instance, for 20 minutes. When I wake up again, it's not sleep, and I wake up again, I feel totally refreshed. I still need the same amount of sleep, but to me, it gives me a feeling of rest, relief, and also to get my consciousness kind of working for me and not against me.
Can you share a couple tools, a couple ways that you've learned to make this happen? Or is it something that
Yeah, I'm sure on YouTube you can find good ways to do it. The way I'm doing it is if I'm home, I go to my bedroom. When my daughters were living with me, my life was very much about noise and noise and noise, the teenage daughters. But I asked them to kind of shut up, at least not come and knock on my door. And then I laid on the bed. I felt secure that no one's going to disturb me. I lay on my back, breathing is slowly in and out, in and out. Either I'm just emptying my mind and my body for everything, or sometimes also kind of maybe keep one idea, which I try to follow. And then I decide to kind of sink into myself. And I decide, is it going to be 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 12 minutes, or 20 minutes? And then almost exactly on the minute, I wake up again. So I learned this in a couple of hours. I don't think I have any particular talent for this. I'm sure most other people learn it as quickly as I did.
there's definitely something different in the way that an explorer approaches risks and fear and the unexpected. Not everyone goes to the North Pole or the South Pole or Everest. I mean, what was that drive? What was the thing that kept you going back to achieve these monumental goals?
I think, like we talked about, I think it is about curiosity, it's about wonder, it's about, being born an explorer, keeping up that spirit. It is about being in nature. And it's also about, it's sympathetic reasons and less sympathetic reasons. And less sympathetic reasons would be the desire for recognition, and also the many reasons that I'm not aware of, explorers also in general are not aware of. The explorers in general that would like to find out how I can do something and not why I'm doing it. When I wrote the book about the North Pole, I really tried to dig into it and really tried to understand why we humans are doing what we're doing, and also explorers going to the North Pole, but then again, going back to the North Pole, as asked about, because that's also deeply fascinating. That in a lot of travel literature, the story is that a human travels far, far away. When eventually that person returns to home, he or she find all the answers that they asked themselves before they left for this voyage or journey. But somehow polar explorers seem to never to be satisfied when they're home. They want to go out again. So even when they know, they're going to starve and freeze and get exhausted and expose themselves from danger. And one reason I found, thanks also to the British explorer Ben Saunders, was that so many of the explorers trying to get to the North Pole, eventually getting to the North Pole after 400 or 500 years of trying, is that they have a super difficult relationship to their father.
Yeah.
I think that's a red line. I don't think if you had a happy childhood, you will never try to walk to the North Pole, I think. So that's and also when I was a kid, I was heavily dyslexic. And I couldn't pronounce my name, I couldn't read, I couldn't write, and I couldn't, I had many problems. And before I was 10 years old. Then my father read Tarzan for me, so Tarzan was kind of a huge role model for me. And my mother was more like an intellectual. My father was a jazz critic. My mother, so she read Homer's, and how do you pronounce it in English? Odysseus. And the beginning of Odysseus is not about Odysseus, it's about his son. He hasn't seen his father for 20 years. And of course, every kid, the life of their parents before they were born is a mystery. But for Telemachus, it's also a mystery the first 20 years he's alive. Then he leaves his mother, he leaves his home, and he sails onto the ocean to see if his father is alive, to try to understand what his father has been up to, and try to get to know himself much better. So to me, the history of exploration, all the way from this story which is thousands of years old until today, is quite often has an element of father and son relationship. And of course, it's not only an exploration, it's all, all literature, or every second great novel is about the same. And the Bible, of course, would not have been a very thick book if fathers had a good relationship to their sons.
It's so interesting. Just recently, there was this stand-up comedy, and the comedian actually said something about if you wanted to have a son or a child who wanted to be an achiever or do things, just be the absent father. So it's gonna be.
Exactly. And like my great grandfather, he was a sailor. He was home like once a year. He made his wife pregnant. He beat up her, beat up the other kids, and then left again. And then when my grandfather was 6 years old, his father died, and he had to live on a orphanage for poor families because his mother couldn't look after him. And of course, he became a tough guy. You either go the under. So I mean, I don't want to romanticize about it, but just a matter of fact that I think explorers in general, they do things despite of and not because of. They do things not because they don't feel fair. They feel fair like everyone else, but they do it despite the feeling of fair.
Like you said, it's not to be romanticized, but it is worth asking, even in today's culture where a lot of the parenting is focused on giving everything and the kids have nothing left to fight for, to look, and it actually does not help them becoming resilient. There's definitely a correlation there.
Yeah, I live in Norway, I live in Oslo, very privileged society in general. Like, it's so much oil money, few people, huge country, lots of nature, health care, schools are for free. And then you have all this beautiful, like, all this, but, you see this beautiful blonde girls, like when I went to kindergarten, at school, high school, etc. And we're always treated better than anyone else because we're cute, we're good looking. That's not the girl you should marry. Because if you're spoiled throughout your whole life, it's not a good start, I think.
Growth and learning, by definition, means that you have to go outside of your comfort zone. You have, I mean, even if you go down to the cellular, a muscle cell will destroy itself so it can rebuild it. If you're never getting out of your comfort zone, if you're never getting out into the unknown, you will never grow or never learn. So what would be for someone who has done a lot of writing, a lot of thinking, a lot of reflecting, and a lot of sitting into this place of silence? What would be Erling's 3 words of wisdom? Or maybe that's what your latest book is all about. But 3 words of wisdom.
Stop underestimating yourself.
It's like the Germans when they take all these words and then they make one big word. We'll make 3 words out of that statement. Is that
I just said it because, of course, some people are overestimating themselves, but most people, in my experience, and I have met thousands of people when I'm traveling, are underestimating themselves. But, one Norwegian word we have, which contains 3 words: fri, luft, liv. Fri means free, luft, air, liv, life. And then we have, one word that contains all three. And I think that's the absolute greatest word we have in Norwegian. I don't know any other language that has combined those three deeply existential, meaningful words in one word. So free, air, life.
if we go back to that conversation we're having about being optimistic about the future as opposed to pessimistic, do you think that something that people have forgotten because we live in such a convenient and spoiled life that we've forgotten the agency or how resilient we are as a species in places of hardships?
Yes, I think that could partly be the case. A little bit outside my own field on this, but when you read people's comments or listen to what people say, they talk about overtime as the most the time most exposed to danger than ever. And that's totally wrong. So we have this kind of so self-occupied, we're so self-centered that we believe this is kind of the most dangerous of all times. And the 1970s were super dangerous with the possibility for nuclear war. So was the early 1980s. And if you lived through the Second World War or the First World War, not to mention 30 years war from 1618 to 1648 in Europe, when in Germany and neighboring countries, or today's Germany and neighboring countries, where kind of had this civil war for 30 years. It was absolutely so brutal, kind of beyond imagination. I can't say it's good news, but it's just a matter of fact. And I also think it's important to reflect over that the world has always been a dangerous place to be.
Even today, with all the politics that's going on, and when people say, "Oh, we've never been there," we just have to go back into history and not too
Yeah,
far. And
and also back in history, but also around in the world, because we had massacres in Rwanda only
yeah.
a few years ago. So it's sufficient of examples.
It's as soon as you manage to shift the noise or move the noise away, and you can see the light or you can see the path ahead. For me, I've created this mantra: stop, breathe, relax, listen. Creating that space where you can take a deep breath and just let all the noise go away. But with a different perspective, you can achieve a lot. Erling, just before we let you go, you have a new book coming out. So this is going to be your ninth book, I
Yeah,
understand. What is this one in particular?
it is about the history of the North Pole from prehistoric times when people in the northern hemisphere were looking up into the sky and all the stars, all the planets were turning around, and so was the Earth, just one fixed point in the whole universe, and that was the North Star, the Polaris. Then they started to wonder what's below that star. That, of course, was the geographical North Pole. Then I just write about the history from then until today. So the book is called After the North Pole, a story on survival, myth making, and melting ice. So it took me almost 6 years to write the book, to do research and to write it. Of course, I did many other things at the same time, but it was a huge task to write that book. But then again, many people have been writing about the history of the Arctic and polar expeditions, but no one who had actually walked there had been writing this story. So I felt I had something new to come up with.
It seems to be like a lot of history, but being a philosopher and an art collector, were you able to slip in some philosophy and some art perspective into the book?
Yeah, I liked it. It's with the art, it's interesting to see artists like Caspar David Friedrich, who in 19th century kind of painted the eyes, and also other artists about Frankenstein following the monster up towards the North Pole to kill him. And also in philosophy, I'm trying not to overdo it because it's not a philosophy book, it's a history about the world seen from the North Pole. But just like one example which is interesting on expeditions, and also think is one of the reasons why people go out again on expeditions, is because life on the ice is very much about you're starving, you're super hungry, and then you eat food, you get full or almost full. You're very cold, you have frostbites, and then you get warm. And then you're totally exhausted, and you will get some rest, you will get some sleep. And that's are the basis, or that are the origins to gratefulness, to gratitude. So that's how people throughout almost every generation has felt gratitude to have those three emotions. Today, they're almost forgotten, at least in our part of the world. Just kind of get down to those feelings and also to write about them in the book. I felt was very important to remind people that, that's where we came from.
Is the book already out?
Yeah, it's just coming out in these days. So I'm very excited about it.
You have your own publishing company, but for people that are not in Norway, can they find it on Amazon?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's already translating to 15 different languages. So order it on Amazon and you will have it tomorrow.
Excellent. Well, we'll put the link in the description so people can
Thank you.
can have it. And I'm looking forward to have my own copy so I can read it. Um, Erling, it's been a real pleasure, and I'm looking forward to our path crosses so that we can take the time for a walk and continue that conversation with a bottle of wine also and cooking.
I think that those two, to walk together first and then share a meal and a bottle of wine, that's kind of the two greatest pleasures you can have as a human.
We agree there also. Erling, thank you so much, and looking forward for our next encounter together.
Come visit me.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye bye.